The handcuffs were already on before the ambulance finished parking. 31-year-old trauma nurse Lena Vasquez had just worked 14 hours straight inside Hartwell General Medical Center in the city of Crestwood. She hadn't eaten since morning. Her scrubs had a patient's blood dried on the left sleeve. All she did was ask the patrol officer blocking the ambulance bay to move his vehicle. What happened next was recorded on 4 different security cameras. Officer Dale Rourke spun around, grabbed her by the shoulder, shoved her against the hood of his cruiser, and snapped both wrists into cuffs while hospital staff watched in stunned silence. A man in a wheelchair near the entrance doors saw the whole thing and started filming on his phone. "You're obstructing law enforcement," Rourke said. Lena said nothing. She let him put her in the back of the car. She didn't fight. She didn't cry. She stared out the window at the hospital entrance she had just walked out of and said, very quietly, to no one in particular, "He has no idea what he just started." She was right. Because 8 minutes later, an unmarked military helicopter cut through the Crestwood skyline and landed in the middle of Alderton Street. And nothing in that city was ever the same again. If you're just finding this channel, hit follow right now, because this story does not slow down. Like this video, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The shift had started badly and never recovered. Lena Vasquez arrived at Hartwell General at 5:45 in the morning, 45 minutes before her official start time, because the night charge nurse had called her at 5:15 in a panic. 2 nurses had called out sick, a third had a family emergency, and the trauma bay was already backed up with 3 incoming cases from a highway pileup on Route 9. Lena lived 12 minutes from the hospital. She said she'd be there. She didn't think about it. She just went. That was the thing people didn't understand about Lena. She wasn't some idealized version of a selfless hero. She was 31 years old. She was tired most of the time. She drank too much coffee. She had a short fuse when people were deliberately stupid. And she had spent the last 4 years building a quiet, unremarkable life in Crestwood, because unremarkable was exactly what she needed. She paid her rent on time. She kept mostly to herself. She showed up for her shifts, she did the work, and she went home. What she didn't advertise to anyone was the 8 years that came before Crestwood. The morning blurred the way bad shifts always did, in fragments, not sequence. A 43-year-old with a crushed sternum, a teenager who had gone through the windshield, a woman who had coded twice in the ambulance and arrived barely holding on. Lena moved through all of it with the kind of calm that other nurses sometimes mistook for coldness, because she didn't talk much while she worked, and she didn't explain her decisions before she made them. She just made them. She assessed, she acted, she moved on. By noon, she had been on her feet for 6 hours with no break. By 2, she had eaten half a granola bar standing at the medication station. By 4, the trauma bay had finally cleared enough for the charge nurse to tell her she could take a real break. And Lena had looked at the clock and calculated that she had 3 more hours left in her shift and decided a break would only make the exhaustion worse. She was wrong about that, but she pushed through anyway. The problem with Dale Rourke started the way most problems in hospital emergency departments started, with something small and with someone who had no interest in being reasonable. The ambulance bay at Hartwell General was not a large space. It had been designed for 2 simultaneous vehicle drop-offs, but the construction on the east wing, which had been ongoing for 11 months, had effectively reduced it to 1 usable lane. The hospital had posted clear signage. They had sent letters to the Crestwood Police Department twice, explaining the access restrictions and asking for cooperation. The police department had acknowledged both letters and done nothing in particular about them. Lena stepped outside through the bay doors at 6:12 in the evening to get some air. She had been inside since before 6 in the morning. She stood on the concrete apron near the entrance, rolled her neck, and noticed immediately that a CPD patrol SUV was parked across the access lane at an angle that would make it physically impossible for an incoming ambulance to get through. She looked at the SUV. She looked at the lane. She looked at the SUV again. Officer Dale Rourke was leaning against the front quarter panel with his arms crossed, talking to another officer she didn't recognize. He was a big man, late 30s, with the easy posture of someone who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. He wasn't doing anything urgent. He was having a conversation. Lena walked over. "Excuse me," she said. "Can you move the vehicle?" We've got a lane restriction because of the construction, and we need this access clear for incoming ambulances. Rourke glanced at her, glanced back at the other officer, finished whatever he was saying, then looked at her again, taking his time. "I'll be 5 minutes," he said. "I understand, but the lane needs to be clear regardless. We've had 2 vehicles block this access in the past month, and both times it caused problems for incoming patients." "Lady," Rourke said with a particular kind of flatness that was its own form of dismissal, "I said 5 minutes." Lena felt the familiar tightening in her jaw that she had spent a long time learning to manage. She breathed through it. "I'm not trying to cause a problem. I'm asking you to move the vehicle because it's a patient safety issue. That's all." "You're asking me to do it right now because you've decided it's urgent," Rourke said. "I'm telling you, I'll do it in 5 minutes. That should be the end of this conversation." It should have been. If he had moved the vehicle, or even if he had just been less deliberate about his condescension, it probably would have been. Lena had dealt with difficult people her entire career. She knew how to disengage. She knew how to let it go. But then his radio crackled. Someone said something about a disturbance 3 blocks over, and instead of moving his vehicle, Rourke turned away from her entirely and started walking toward the other officer to continue a different conversation, as if Lena had simply ceased to exist. "Officer," she said. He kept walking. "Officer Rourke." He stopped, turned around slowly. The look on his face when he turned was different. Something had shifted in it, some calculation she recognized but couldn't quite read. "Are you following me?" he said. The question was so disconnected from reality that Lena actually paused. "I'm standing in the ambulance bay of the hospital where I work, asking you to move a vehicle that is blocking emergency access. I'm not following you anywhere." "You've been on me since I got here," Rourke said. "I've asked you twice to step back. That's interference with a law enforcement officer." "That's—" Lena stopped. She looked at him carefully. He wasn't confused. He wasn't misremembering. He was constructing something in real time with the calm efficiency of someone who had done it before. "You have not asked me to step back. Not once." "I'm asking you now," Rourke said. "Back up." The second officer had turned around. A man near the entrance in a wheelchair, one of the outpatient rehab patients who sometimes sat outside in the afternoons, had his phone out. Lena didn't see it at first, but she became aware, in her peripheral vision, of the small gesture. She took 1 step back, a clear, visible step back. She put her hands at her sides, palms out, where any camera could see them. "I've stepped back," she said. "I am not interfering with anything. I am asking one more time for you to please move your vehicle." What happened next took approximately 4 seconds. Rourke crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, grabbed her right shoulder, spun her toward his cruiser, and pushed her forward so that her left hip hit the hood. She didn't resist. She didn't react. She absorbed it with the kind of trained muscle memory that took years to build, going loose instead of rigid, not giving him anything to escalate against. The handcuffs went on fast. He was practiced at it, and he pulled her upright and walked her toward the back door of the patrol vehicle while the other officer stood very still and said nothing. "You're being detained for interfering with law enforcement," Rourke said. "You can explain yourself at the station." The man in the wheelchair was filming. Lena saw it clearly as she turned. She didn't ask him to stop. She looked at the camera for exactly 1 second, long enough to make sure her face was visible, that the badge number on Rourke's chest was in frame, that the ambulance bay access behind her was clearly blocked, and then she looked away. "You still have time to fix this," she said. Her voice was completely level. Rourke opened the car door and put her in without answering. The back of the patrol vehicle smelled like pine cleaner and stale coffee. Lena sat with her hands cuffed behind her and her spine straight and stared at the metal divider separating her from the front seat. Her shift bag was still inside the hospital. Her phone was in her left scrub pocket, which she couldn't reach. She had a small bruise forming on her left hip where it had hit the hood, and her right shoulder ached from the grab, and she was acutely aware of how hungry she was. She did not panic. Panic had been trained out of her a long time ago, in circumstances that made this look manageable. She ran through the immediate facts instead. She had been in the camera's field of view. The man in the wheelchair had been filming before the physical contact. She was almost certain of it. Her badge, with her employee ID and her name, was clipped to her left breast pocket and would have been visible in any footage. The ambulance bay was still blocked. She thought about that last part and felt the first real edge of anger cut through the exhaustion, not at Rourke, at the fact that if a trauma case came in while she was sitting in this car, with that lane blocked, someone might die waiting. She closed her eyes, breathed, thought about what she needed to do when she got to the station, who she needed to call, how to handle the next 2 hours. She was so deep in the calculation that she almost missed the sound. It started low, a rhythmic thudding from somewhere above the urban noise of traffic and distant sirens. It built quickly, closer than she expected, and then it was overhead, and the windows of the patrol vehicle were shaking with the rotor wash, and even Rourke, who had been on his phone in the front seat, went very still. Lena opened her eyes. Through the side window, she could see the tops of the streetlights bending, paper from a nearby trash can scattered across the asphalt. People on the sidewalk stopped walking and tipped their faces up. A cyclist hit his brakes and put both feet down. The helicopter, matte, no visible markings, running lights the color of amber rather than the standard red, descended in a flat controlled drop directly into the intersection of Alderton and Harwick, less than 60 yards from where the patrol car was sitting. It didn't land so much as it settled, with a precision that spoke of serious training and better equipment than any municipal agency in Crestwood operated. The rotors went to idle. The door opened. 4 people stepped out. They were in civilian clothing, no uniforms, no visible insignia, but they moved the way that only military people and certain federal agents moved, with an economy of motion that had nothing to do with looking impressive and everything to do with covering ground efficiently and keeping hands free. The one in front was a woman, slightly shorter than the others, and she was already on a radio or phone talking quickly, eyes scanning the block. Rourke got out of the car. Lena watched through the side window as the woman from the helicopter held up something. Credentials, from the shape and the way Rourke reacted to them, going from annoyed to very carefully neutral in about 1 second flat. The conversation that followed lasted less than 90 seconds. Lena couldn't hear it through the glass, but she didn't need to. She could read posture. Rourke started the conversation with his chest out and ended it with his shoulders pulled back, not in confidence, but in the physical restraint of someone who was trying very hard not to show that they had just understood something alarming. The woman turned from Rourke and walked directly to the back door of the patrol car. She opened it. "Ms. Vasquez," her voice was controlled, not warm, not cold, professional in the specific way that came from practice. "Can you step out, please?" "I'm in handcuffs," Lena said. "I know. Officer Rourke is going to remove them." She looked at Rourke, who had come around the car, and now produced his key with the expression of someone performing a task they understood they had no choice about. The cuffs came off. Lena stepped out of the vehicle and rolled both wrists once, a small automatic gesture, then stopped and stood straight. "I'm Agent Carver," the woman said. "We need to speak with you immediately. There's been a situation involving the federal operation you've been supporting." She said it quietly and matter-of-factly, as if there were nothing remarkable about standing in the middle of a Crestwood street with a helicopter behind her, speaking to a trauma nurse in blood-stained scrubs who had just been taken out of the back of a patrol car in cuffs. Lena looked at her for a moment, looked at the helicopter, looked at the 3 other personnel who had spread out at the perimeter of the intersection, not threateningly, but deliberately, the way people spread out when they are securing a space. "How long has the check-in been missed?" she asked. Carver's expression didn't shift, but something in it tightened fractionally. 43 minutes. "What's the situation?" Deputy Director Holt collapsed in the command vehicle approximately 26 minutes ago. The team medic has been holding him, but we're losing ground. She paused. "He asked for you specifically." Lena felt the information land and processed it in the direct way she processed everything clinical, stripping it down to what it required from her, not how it made her feel. She turned back to Rourke, who was standing near his cruiser with his arms at his sides and an expression she recognized as a man trying to figure out what exactly had just happened to his evening. "Your vehicle is still blocking the ambulance bay," Lena said to him. "Move it." She didn't wait to see if he obeyed. She was already walking toward the helicopter. Carver fell into step beside her. "We have a full field kit on board. You'll have everything you need." What was he doing when he collapsed? He had just reviewed a document. He went pale, said he felt pressure in his chest, and went down. Initially, we thought stress reaction, but he lost consciousness for about 40 seconds, and when he came back, his speech was slightly slurred on the left side. Age? 58. Medications? Metoprolol for blood pressure. That's all we have on file. When did he last take it? We don't know. Okay. Lena stepped up into the helicopter, and the interior was larger than the exterior suggested, with fold-down seats along both sides and a cleared center space where equipment was staged. She scanned the kit in 2 seconds and noted what was present and what she'd need to improvise. Get me airborne. The sooner I see him, the better. The rotors began to spool back up. Carver took the seat across from Lena and put her radio back to her mouth. But before she could speak, she said, not over the radio, just to Lena, I want you to know that as of 18 minutes ago, a formal complaint was filed on your behalf with the Crestwood Police Department's Office of Professional Responsibility. Everything that happened in that bay is documented. Lena was going through the kit, checking a pressure cuff, cataloging medications. She didn't look up. Tell me about the document Holt reviewed, she said. The one that triggered the episode. What was in it? Carver looked at her for a beat. Then she brought the radio back to her mouth. Tell the ground team we're 2 minutes out, she said, and pull up the case file on the Hartwell billing audit, all of it. The helicopter lifted. Below them, Crestwood shrank. The hospital, the blocked ambulance bay, the intersection where a patrol officer was still standing beside his cruiser, watching a matte black aircraft take the woman he had just put in handcuffs straight up into the evening sky. The document Carver described was 37 pages long. An internal financial audit of Hartwell General Medical Center that had been flagged by a federal contractor 6 weeks earlier and quietly routed to Holt's team. Someone inside the hospital had tried to bury it. Someone had succeeded for nearly 8 months before a whistleblower made an anonymous call to a federal tip line. Lena had known about the audit. What she hadn't known, what no one had told her, was that in the 24 hours since Holt had begun reviewing the physical documentation, 3 people inside Hartwell General had made calls to numbers that federal analysts had flagged as belonging to individuals under active federal surveillance. 3 calls. 3 separate people, all within the same 8-hour window. Who made the calls? Lena asked. Carver turned from the window and looked at her directly. That's what Holt was about to tell his team when he collapsed. The helicopter banked left, and through the window Lena could see the grid of Crestwood below, the lights of Hartwell General still visible from altitude, the ambulance bay finally clear now, a vehicle pulling away from the access lane. She thought about the 14 hours she had just worked, the patients she had moved through, the hands she had assessed, the charts she had checked, the medications she had administered. She thought about the people inside that building, the ones she worked with every day, the ones who had smiled at her in the corridor and asked about her weekend and stood beside her during codes. 3 calls, 1 8-hour window. She set down the pressure cuff and looked at the equipment kit. Then she looked at Carver. I'm going to need everything you have on those phone numbers, she said. But first I need to make sure Holt is alive. She turned back to the kit. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. The helicopter descended toward the secure ground unit 3 miles east of the city, and somewhere below them, in a building where Lena Vasquez had spent the last 4 years showing up early and staying late and documenting every irregularity she had ever noticed in a set of files that now sat locked in a federal server, the people who had made those 3 phone calls were about to realize that the officer who had arrested her had not, in fact, removed her from the equation. He had accelerated it. The ground unit was a converted logistics warehouse 3 miles east of Crestwood's downtown grid, the kind of building that didn't appear on any city planning map because the paperwork that should have recorded its federal lease had been filed under a shell contractor name in a different county. Lena had been there twice before, both times at night, both times for briefings that lasted under an hour, both times with the particular sensation of moving through a space that officially didn't exist. The helicopter set down on a marked pad behind the building, and before the rotors had fully wound down, Carver had the door open and was moving. Lena was right behind her, kit in hand, and the two of them crossed the tarmac at a pace that wasn't quite running but covered ground the way running did. The man waiting at the rear entrance was in his 40s, lean in the way that came from years of being too busy to eat regularly rather than from any kind of discipline about it. He had a tactical radio clipped to his belt and the expression of someone who had been managing a crisis for the past half hour by sheer force of controlled panic. "She has full access," Carver said to him as they passed. He fell into step behind them without comment. "How long since he last spoke?" Lena asked. 12 minutes, he said. He was coherent about 6 minutes before that. Couldn't tell us anything useful. He was focused on staying awake. "Airway. Clear. Medic has him on supplemental O2. BP when he went down? 194 over 112. Lena processed this without breaking stride. Hypertensive crisis was a possibility. Ischemic event was a possibility. Something else was also a possibility, and she filed that under things to test for as soon as she had eyes on him. The interior of the building was lit with work lights rather than overhead fluorescents, which meant the federal team operating out of it hadn't yet bothered with the kind of infrastructure that implied long-term occupation. Temporary folding tables held banks of laptops. A whiteboard on the far wall had been covered in something, and then covered again with a cloth. 3 people in civilian clothes were on phones simultaneously, and none of them looked up as Lena walked through. The command vehicle was parked inside, which meant they had driven it in through the loading bay. It was a modified medical transport van, dark gray, reinforced panels, blacked-out windows, and the side door was standing open. The medic, a young man with close-cropped hair, and a focused expression that cracked slightly when he saw Lena come through the door, moved immediately to give her space. "Talk to me," she said, not as a request. "Pulse was irregular when I got to him, settled out about 8 minutes ago to 86 and weak. Pressure was dropping before I got a saline line in. He's been in and out. Right now he's in." He paused. "He was asking for you before he stopped talking." Deputy Director Marcus Holt was 60 years old, though the file had said 58, and someone had either gotten it wrong or Holt had. He was a large man, now diminished by the position he was in, reclined in the command seat with his head back, and his color, the particular gray-yellow that Lena had learned to read as a body, in active distress. His eyes were open. They tracked to her when she came in. "Vasquez," he said. The word was slightly thick on the left side. "I'm here." She was already taking his wrist, feeling the pulse, noting its quality and rhythm, while she looked at the monitor the medic had running. "Don't try to tell me anything yet. Let me look at you first." "Need to? I know what you need to do. Give me 4 minutes." He closed his mouth. His jaw was tight with the effort of it. She worked fast and without narrating what she was doing, which was a habit she had never been able to train out of herself. She had been told by more than one supervising physician over the years that she was difficult to assist because she moved through assessments without announcing her steps, as if the checklist existed only inside her own head. It did. She had been building that checklist since she was 22 years old in environments where announcing your next move out loud was the kind of thing that got people killed. What she found was not a straightforward hypertensive crisis. His pressure was elevated, but not catastrophically so, now that the line was in. The slurred speech on the left was concerning, but it hadn't progressed. No facial droop, grip strength equal bilaterally, eyes tracking correctly. The irregularity the medic had noted was likely vagal, stress-induced, not the kind that came from structural cardiac damage. His lung sounds were clear, abdomen soft. She sat back on her heels and looked at him directly. "When did you last eat?" He blinked. "I don't. Rough estimate. This morning, early. Metoprolol with or without food?" "Without. I was late." She looked at the medic. "Push 25 of labetalol slow, get me a glucose strip, and find me something with sugar in it. Juice, a granola bar, anything." The medic moved. Lena turned back to Holt. "I don't think you're actively stroking," she said. "I think you have severely uncontrolled blood pressure compounded by low blood sugar and a significant stress response. The speech slur concerns me, and I want to watch it for the next 30 minutes before I commit to that assessment. But right now, I need you to tell me what was in the document." He didn't hesitate. Whatever energy he had been reserving for this, he spent it immediately. The billing audit flagged $47 million in fraudulent treatment claims, he said, all tied to veterans' health care reimbursements. We knew the number was big. We didn't know how it was structured. He paused to breathe. The effort of talking was visible. It wasn't a single scheme. It was layered. Somebody inside Hartwell built a system that created phantom treatment records for veterans who had already left the area. Some of them were deceased. The claims were processed through a third-party billing contractor who had a silent partner with access to the federal reimbursement pipeline. Lena kept her expression neutral. She had known there was fraud. She had known it was significant. 47 million was not a number she had been prepared for. The billing contractor, she said. Do we have a name? Meridian Healthcare Solutions, registered in Delaware, operational address in Crestwood. The silent partner in the reimbursement pipeline. He stopped. His eyes moved to Carver, who had come into the van and was standing near the door. Something passed between them. I need to hear it, Lena said. The silent partner has a federal employment record, Holt said, which is why this has been as slow as it has been. Someone inside a federal oversight office has been running interference on this audit for the better part of a year. The medic came back with the labetalol drawn and a bottle of orange juice that looked like it had come from someone's personal bag. Lena took both, passed Holt the juice, and watched him drink it with the absent-minded focus of someone who registered the necessity but resented the interruption. The medic pushed the medication slow and smooth while Lena kept one hand on Holt's wrist. We identified the 3 phone calls, Carver said from the door. The numbers match 2 contacts we've had on a watch list for 6 months and 1 number that's new. The new one pinged a tower 3 blocks from Hartwell General. Lena processed this. Someone inside the hospital made a call when they found out Holt was reviewing the physical documents. That's our read, yes. Which means someone inside the hospital knew which documents were being reviewed and when. Silence in the van for a moment. The kind of silence that had weight. We have a leak, Holt said. He said it like a man who had been hoping he was wrong about it and had just run out of road to be wrong on. Lena set the glucose strip aside. She looked at the monitor. His pressure was coming down, slowly, which was what she wanted. Too fast was its own problem. The color in his face was marginally better. The reports I filed, she said, the documentation I submitted to hospital administration over the past 18 months, billing irregularities, duplicate treatment codes, patient records that didn't match the corresponding claims. Where did those reports go? Internal compliance, Holt said. And from there, he looked at her. We're pulling that chain right now. She nodded once. She had suspected the answer before she asked the question. The reports had gone into the compliance office and they had disappeared. Not rejected, not investigated, just absorbed and silenced. She had followed up twice on the first report. The second time she followed up, she had received a call from hospital administration asking her to come in for a meeting about her documentation practices, which was a particular kind of institutional threat she had recognized immediately. She had gone to the meeting. She had said almost nothing. She had gone home and filed a secure report to a federal contact number she had been given before she left the military. That was 14 months ago. 14 months of showing up for her shifts, doing her job, and waiting. The compliance office, she said. Who runs it? Carver answered. Acting compliance director is a woman named Sandra Pruitt. She's been in the role for 2 years. Before that, she was deputy director of operations under the previous hospital administrator. And the current administrator? Richard Cade. He took over 3 years ago. Lena had worked under Richard Cade for 3 years. She thought about the way he moved through the hospital, the particular brand of administrative authority he wore, the way he spoke to physicians versus the way he spoke to nurses, the specific expression on his face the one time they had been in the same room during a budget meeting when someone had raised the cost discrepancies in the veterans billing department. He had shut it down in under 2 minutes. She remembered thinking it was fast. She had written it down when she got home that night. I need my notes, she said. I have a personal documentation file, encrypted, stored on a server that isn't Hartwell's network. I can get you the access credentials when I have my phone. We know about the file, Holt said. It's been partially incorporated into the federal record already. That's how we knew your compliance reports had been suppressed. You had copies of everything you submitted, time-stamped, with the delivery confirmations. There was something mildly disconcerting about learning that a federal agency had been quietly building a case file around her personal notes for over a year without telling her. She set it aside. It was useful, and she understood the operational logic of it, even if it left a particular feeling she didn't have words for right now. His pressure is better, the medic said. Lena looked at the monitor, 162/94. Still elevated, but moving in the right direction. She looked at Holt's face. The color was closer to normal. When she asked him to squeeze both her hands simultaneously, the grip was equal and firm. "The slur is better," she said. "I can tell," he said, which meant he'd been aware of it, which meant his cognition had been intact throughout. She marked that as a significant positive. "I want you monitored for the next 2 hours," she said. "No decisions, no calls, no more document reviews until your pressure is consistently under 150. That's not a negotiation." "We don't have 2 hours, Vasquez. If you have another episode and I'm not here, you might not have any hours at all." She said it without heat, just as a fact. 2 hours. After that, you can do whatever you need to do. He looked at her for a moment with the particular expression of a man who was used to being in charge and had just encountered someone who was not impressed by that fact. Then he looked at Carver and said, "Get Nolan on the phone and tell him we need the warrant package moved up." Carver stepped outside the van to make the call. The medic adjusted the drip. Outside, someone was moving equipment. The sound of wheels on concrete, voices at low register, the specific ambient noise of an operation shifting from standby to active. Lena sat on the edge of the fold-down seat and pressed the heel of her hand briefly against her left eye. She had now been awake for over 16 hours. Her hip was bruised, her shoulder ached. She was sitting in a clandestine federal vehicle, helping manage a crisis that had started with a man who didn't want to move his patrol car. "Vasquez." Holt's voice was quieter now, less pressed. She looked at him. "The arrest tonight. What Rourke did." He paused. "I want you to know that's being handled independently of this operation. The footage has already been reviewed." "I know," she said. "It's going to get worse before it gets better," he said. "Once we move on Hartwell, there are going to be people who try to make the case that you were a disgruntled employee, that the documentation was motivated, that what happened tonight was part of some personal agenda. I know that too. Does it bother you?" She thought about the answer with more honesty than the question probably required. "It bothered me the first time someone accused me of having a personal agenda for filing an accurate report," she said. "Not so much anymore." He studied her for a moment. "Your file describes you as difficult to read." "My file describes a lot of things incorrectly," she said, without particular rancor. The faint edge of something that might have been a smile crossed his face and disappeared. "Fair enough." Carver came back into the van. Her expression had changed. Not dramatically, but Lena read it the way she read everything, in the small shifts rather than the large ones, and what she saw there was not good news. "Nolan can't move the warrant package," Carver said. "Judge Mira Delacroix was supposed to sign off on the search authorization tonight. She's recused." Holt went still. "On what basis?" "Conflict of interest. She's listed as a character reference on Richard Cade's professional biography from when he applied for the hospital administrator position 3 years ago." The silence that followed was different from the earlier one, tighter. "Who else can sign?" Lena asked. Carver looked at her. "That's the problem. The warrant has been routed through a specific federal circuit because of the classified components. There are 3 judges authorized to sign. Delacroix was one. Of the other 2, one is traveling internationally, and the other is Judge Harmon Pitts." She paused. "Pitts has been on our internal watch list since April. We don't know why yet, but Nolan doesn't want to route anything through him until we do." "So we have a warrant that can't be executed," Holt said. "Not tonight. Nolan is working on an emergency authorization pathway through a different circuit, but it needs sign-off from 2 additional senior officials, and both of them are—" "Tell me they're reachable," Holt said. "One is. The other went dark 3 hours ago." Another silence. Lena sat very still. She was thinking about the phone calls made from inside Hartwell General, the 8-hour window, the speed with which the situation was developing complications on every front simultaneously. "How long ago did Delacroix recuse?" she asked. Carver checked her phone. "The notification came through at 7:41. What time were the calls made from the hospital? Carver's eyes came up from the phone screen slowly. She understood where Lena was going before the sentence finished. Earliest call was at 6:53. 48 minutes. Someone had made a call from inside Hartwell General at 6:53. The judge assigned to the warrant had recused at 7:41. That's not a coincidence, Lena said. No, Carver said. It is not. Holt had gone very still in his reclined position, the kind of stillness that wasn't rest but was calculation. They know we're moving, he said. They don't know how much we have, but they know something is coming. They're dismantling the authorization pathway. Which means they have someone inside who knows about the warrant, Lena said. Or someone who knows enough about our process to anticipate it, Carver said, but her tone said she didn't entirely believe her own distinction. Lena looked at the whiteboard on the far wall, the one with the cloth over it. She had been curious about it since she walked in. Is that the network map? Carver looked at Holt. Holt looked at Lena with the assessment of a man deciding something quickly. Show her, he said. Carver pulled the cloth. The whiteboard was covered in a dense web of names, dates, arrows, and colored lines, the kind of visual mapping that federal investigators built when a case had grown past the point where it could be held in any single person's head. There were photographs pinned at several nodes. Lena recognized two of the faces immediately. The first was Richard Cade, Hartwell General's administrator. The second was Sandra Pruitt, the compliance director. But it was the third face she focused on, a photograph she hadn't expected to see, in the upper right quadrant of the board connected to the hospital node by two separate lines in different colors. She knew that face. She had seen it 3 times in the past week alone. Who's that? She asked, though she already knew the name. Dr. Frederick Norwal, Carver said, Hartwell's chief of medical staff. He's been on the board for 14 months. Lena said nothing. She was thinking about the morning rounds she had watched Norwal run, the way he moved through the wards, the particular quality of his attention when he was near the veterans wing, not clinical, she realized now, reconstructing the memory. Administrative. He had been counting something. He has a secondary employment record, Carver continued, part-time consulting relationship with Meridian Healthcare Solutions. He disclosed it in his hospital employment file as a minor financial interest. Administration signed off on it. Cade signed off on it, Lena said. Yes. She stared at the photograph for another moment. She thought about the audit she had found 14 months ago, a small billing discrepancy in the veterans wing, easily explainable on its own, the kind of thing that disappeared into statistical noise unless you were looking at the pattern. She had been looking at the pattern because she was the kind of person who noticed patterns and then couldn't unknow them. She had pulled the thread, and the thread had gone very deep, very fast, and she had made the call she'd been trained to make if she ever found herself holding that kind of thread. 14 months ago. She had been waiting for 14 months. How close are we to a clean authorization pathway? She asked. 6 to 12 hours if everything goes right, Carver said. Longer if the official who went dark doesn't resurface. And in 6 to 12 hours, how much evidence can they move or destroy? Neither Carver nor Holt answered. The answer was implicit in the silence. Lena looked at the board one more time. Then she looked at Holt. Is there anything inside Hartwell that you need me to do? Not federally authorized, not in any official capacity. Just something a nurse who works the next morning shift might do, entirely within her normal scope of duties, that would preserve something that needs to be preserved. Holt looked at her for a long moment. His pressure was better. His color was better. He was fully present in the way that he hadn't been 20 minutes ago. Your access to the hospital record system, he said carefully. As a treating nurse, you have standing to request copies of patient records for ongoing clinical purposes. I do, she said. And if those requests were made and the records were transmitted through the secure federal channel you established 14 months ago, they would be copies, Lena said, obtained through normal clinical access. Nothing that required a warrant. Nothing at all, Holt agreed. Carver said nothing. She was looking at the whiteboard. It wasn't a perfect solution. It had edges and risks, and it assumed that Lena's hospital access hadn't already been flagged or restricted, which was an assumption she couldn't verify without logging in. It also assumed she could get back to Hartwell tonight, run the records requests without triggering administrative alerts, and get out before anyone inside the building understood what she'd pulled. She was going to need her phone, her badge, and a way back into the hospital. She was also going to need to know something first. "The official who went dark," she said. "The one you can't reach for the authorization pathway. Do you have a name?" Carver hesitated for a fraction of a second that Lena caught and cataloged. "Deputy Oversight Director Paul Hensley. He has been unreachable since 4:45 this afternoon." Lena thought about this. She felt something cold and quiet settle into place in her chest. Not fear exactly, more the particular sobriety that came from understanding the shape of a bad situation all at once. 4:45, she said. "That's before the calls from the hospital." "Yes," Carver said. "So they moved on Hensley before they knew you were reviewing the physical documents." "That's our assessment, which means they already knew something larger was coming, before tonight, before Holt reviewed the audit." Carver's expression was carefully controlled. "We believe there may be an additional source of information we haven't identified yet." The thing she didn't say out loud, but that hung in the air of the van with complete clarity, was that the additional source was inside the federal operation itself. Lena looked at the board. She looked at the photograph of Norwal. She thought about the 14 months of careful, documented, quietly exhausting work she had done inside a hospital, where the people above her had been burying every piece of evidence she generated. She thought about Dale Rourke, who had put handcuffs on her 8 hours into a 14-hour shift because she had asked him, politely, to move his vehicle. She thought about the man in the wheelchair with his phone. "I'm going to need a secure vehicle," she said. "Not this one. Something that looks like nothing. And I need to be back in Crestwood within 40 minutes. Carver looked at Holt. Holt looked at Lena. "What are you going to do?" "My job," she said. "The one I've been doing for the past 14 months. She picked up her kit, set it back on the equipment shelf, and turned toward the van door. Her shoulder still ached. Her hip was going to bruise purple by morning. She hadn't eaten a real meal since 5 a.m., and it was now well past 8 in the evening. She stepped out of the van and into the warehouse floor and found the man with the tactical radio who had met them at the door. "I need a vehicle," she said. Plain, nothing marked, something that parks without drawing attention. He studied her. "Where are you going?" "Hartwell General," she said. "I have a morning shift at 7. He stared at her. "I'm going in early," she said. The warehouse was very active now. 3 more people had arrived since the helicopter landed, and someone had uncovered the whiteboard and was photographing it with a device Lena didn't recognize. The laptops were running multiple screens, and one of them was showing in real time the exterior camera feeds of a building she was almost certain was Hartwell General. She was watching the feeds from across the room when she saw something on the left monitor that made her go completely still. The loading dock at the back of Hartwell General, the one that served the medical records storage room and the compliance office, was active. A gray panel van was backed up to the dock. 2 men were carrying boxes. A third was standing near the dock edge with his back turned, but his posture and the particular way he was standing with one hand on his phone was recognizable. It was Frederick Norwal. It was 9:17 in the evening. Lena turned from the monitors and found Carver directly behind her. "How fast can we get someone to that loading dock?" Carver was already looking at the screen. Her face had gone very still. "Not fast enough," she said, and then quieter. "Not without the warrant." The gray panel van's rear doors swung shut. On the monitor, one of the men slapped the side of the van twice. The other climbed into the passenger seat. Norwal pocketed his phone and walked back through the loading dock door into the hospital without looking back. The van pulled away from the dock and turned right onto the service road, heading east, taillights shrinking on the monitor until they cleared the camera's range and disappeared entirely. Carver was already moving before Lena finished turning from the monitor. She crossed the warehouse floor in 8 strides and had a radio up, talking fast and low, while 2 of the personnel at the laptop bank swung around in their chairs and started working with the focused speed of people who had been waiting for exactly this kind of trigger. Lena stood at the monitor and watched the empty loading dock. The dock light was still on. The door Norwal had walked through was closed. "Can we track the van?" she asked, to no one in particular. One of the laptop operators answered without looking up. Pulling traffic camera feeds on the East Service corridor now. Give me 90 seconds. She gave him 90 seconds. She spent them watching the loading dock and doing the math she didn't want to do. The boxes had been mid-sized, the kind used for file storage. 2 men, multiple trips. She had seen at least 3 transfers in the time she'd been watching, which meant the van had been there before she looked at the screen. How long before was the question? How much had already left? Got it, the operator said. Van turned east on Meridian Road. Current position. He stopped. It stopped. Parking lot of a self-storage facility on Granger Avenue, about 1.5 miles from the hospital. They're transferring it to a secondary location, Carver said, coming back from her radio call. Not destroying it, transferring it. Why not destroy it, Lena asked. Because destruction creates its own evidence. Ash, chemical residue, whatever. And because whoever is running this is still operating like they have time. Carver's jaw was tight. They don't know how far along we are. Or they think the warrant problem buys them enough runway, Lena said. Either way, we need that van. Carver looked at the operator. Is there anyone we can put on it without tipping that we're watching? I can have a passive surveillance unit there in 11 minutes. No contact, no stop, just eyes. Do it. Lena turned from the monitor. She was thinking about Norwal. The way he'd stood at the dock with his phone, not hurried, not furtive, just directing. Like a man who managed logistics as a matter of routine, which was precisely what he had been doing, she now understood, for probably the entire 3 years Kate had been running Hartwell General. She went back to the van where Holt was. He had shifted into a more upright position, and his color was holding. The medic was cross-referencing something on a tablet and had the look of someone who wanted to say, sit down, but had decided against it. Norwal is moving records to an off-site storage facility, Lena said. We have eyes on the van, but we can't intercept without the warrant. I know, Carver just told me. Holt's voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it now. Not panic, but the particular frustration of a senior official watching a months-long operation develop a hole in the wrong moment. Nolan is working the alternate authorization. He says 2 hours minimum. In 2 hours, they can move everything twice. I know that. She stood in the van doorway and thought. Outside, the warehouse activity had intensified. Someone had brought in a second whiteboard, and the network map was being expanded, new nodes added, lines redrawn. The operation was accelerating even as its central mechanism, the warrant, remained stuck. The storage facility, she said. What's the legal status of materials stored there? Carver, who had followed her back, answered. If the facility is privately leased, anything inside is protected from warrantless search. Same problem. But if something happened at the facility, a reported break-in, a fire alarm, anything that required emergency services response, we can't manufacture a pretext, Carver said flatly, that contaminates the entire evidentiary chain. I'm not suggesting manufacturing anything. Lena thought about how to say the next part precisely. I'm asking whether there are legal grounds for emergency entry that already exist that we haven't checked yet. Carver looked at her. Then she looked at the laptop operator. Pull the permit records on that facility, specifically fire safety inspection compliance. The operator's fingers moved. Last inspection was 18 months ago. They were cited for 2 violations: inadequate sprinkler coverage in the rear storage units and improper chemical storage near electrical panels. Were the violations remediated? More keystrokes. No follow-up inspection on record. Carver turned back to Lena with an expression that was not quite a smile but occupied the same space. I'll call the Crestwood Fire Marshal's office. She went back to her radio. Lena leaned against the van door frame and pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose, feeling the headache that had been building since hour 12 of her shift finally announce itself properly. Holt said from behind her, "You think like a tactician." "I think like someone who has been watching institutions fail to act for a long time," she said. "Eventually you start mapping the paths they leave open." He was quiet for a moment. "The reports you filed, 18 months of them. That's not someone who gave up." "Giving up wasn't an option I was willing to take." "Most people would have." She turned to look at him. Most people weren't standing in that veterans wing watching a billing system process claims for men and women who were already dead. She said it without theater, just as a statement of what had been true. That's not something you can unknow and move past. He held her gaze. Something in his settled. "No," he said. "I don't imagine it is." The fire marshal call took 6 minutes to execute and another 12 for the response unit to reach the storage facility. During those 18 minutes, the passive surveillance team confirmed that Norwal's van had been unloaded and a second smaller vehicle had arrived. 2 individuals, not previously identified, had entered the facility. The boxes had been moved inside. The gray panel van had then left the facility and was currently heading north on a route that would take it back toward Hartwell General. The fire marshal's team entered the facility at 9:49 p.m. on the basis of the outstanding safety violations and the anonymous tip, genuine, not manufactured, phoned in by the surveillance unit after they visually confirmed the improperly stored materials still present near an electrical panel, that a fire hazard was actively present. What they found in the rear storage units was not immediately a federal problem. Boxes of documents, file folders, medical records, none of it was their jurisdiction. But the facility manager, confronted with the outstanding violations and the liability of an active inspection, locked the facility. Nothing could be removed until the inspection was complete. The inspection, under Crestwood Municipal Code, could take up to 72 hours. The documents weren't secure, but they were stopped. Lena was back inside the warehouse when the confirmation came through. She heard Carver relay it and felt something that wasn't quite relief. Relief implied the problem was solved, and it wasn't, but was adjacent to it. A door had been closed. Not locked, but closed. 2 hours on the warrant authorization, she said. Maybe less if the second official resurfaces. Maybe less, Carver agreed. So the immediate question is what Norwal does when he gets back to the hospital and realizes the van he sent to the facility isn't responding to his calls. Carver stiffened slightly. You think he'll move on something inside the hospital? If he's smart enough to have run this for 3 years, he's smart enough to have a contingency, something he kept close, didn't send to the storage facility because he wanted it accessible. Lena thought about this. Medical records can be deleted, not as cleanly as they can be physically removed, but the server logs can be manipulated if you have administrator access. Cade has administrator access to the hospital records system, Carver said. Does Norwal? She checked her device. Medical staff records access, not full administrator. But Cade does. Lena looked at the camera feed still running on the laptop screens. Is Cade at the hospital right now? The operator checked. His access badge last pinged inside the building at 8:52, less than an hour ago, after the calls had been made from the hospital, after the judge had recused. Richard Cade was inside Hartwell General at 8:52 p.m. on an evening when the hospital's administrator had no particular clinical reason to be on site. He knows, Lena said. He's in there right now deciding what to delete. Carver was already on the radio. The problem was the same problem it had been for the past 2 hours. Without the warrant, there was no legal mechanism to enter the hospital and stop him. The record system was on Hartwell's private network. A federal agent couldn't walk in and shut down the server without authorization that didn't yet exist. Lena thought about this for approximately 10 seconds. I can get into the record system, she said, legitimately. As a treating nurse with active patient cases, I have clinical access. I can't stop Cade from making changes, but I can initiate a system-wide audit flag on any records I have standing to access. What does an audit flag do? It triggers a compliance review protocol that creates a time-stamped log of every subsequent access to those records. Anyone who opens, modifies, or deletes a flagged record after the flag is set generates an automatic entry in a secondary log that can't be touched without administrator credentials to a different system entirely. Carver was very still. That's not a warrant workaround. It's a nurse doing due diligence on her active patient files, Lena said, which I can do from a remote terminal. I don't need to be in the building. Can they trace the flag back to you? Of course. I'm not hiding it. I'm a nurse who is concerned about the integrity of her patient records. She met Carver's look. Is that a problem? Carver made a decision the way people who were practiced at making decisions in difficult circumstances made them, not instantly, but without hesitation once the calculation completed. Use the secure terminal in the back room. Don't access anything outside your standard clinical scope. If Cade triggers the log, we'll have it. Lena went to the back room. It had 2 chairs, a folding table, and a terminal that had been configured for exactly this kind of access. Secure, logged, deniable in the sense that it routed through a civilian network node before reaching its destination. She logged in with her hospital credentials and sat in the hard chair and started working. The veteran's wing patient files she had active standing on numbered 23. She flagged all 23. Then she pulled the associated billing records. She had clinical access to those as well, because the billing codes affected treatment authorization, and she went through each one methodically and flagged every file that had a corresponding entry in the Meridian Healthcare Solutions billing chain. She was 11 files deep when the system showed her something she hadn't expected. One of the veteran patient records, a man named Gerald Okafor, 64 years old, discharged 8 months ago, had been accessed 14 times in the past 6 weeks, not by his treating physician, not by any clinical staff, by a user ID she didn't recognize, with an access credential that should have belonged to the compliance office, Sandra Pruitt's office. But when she checked the timestamp on the most recent access, it was tonight. 7 minutes ago. Someone in Sandra Pruitt's office, or using Sandra Pruitt's credentials, had accessed Gerald Okafor's record at 9:42 p.m., 13 minutes after the van had arrived at the storage facility. Lena set her hands flat on the table for a moment. She was looking at the timestamp and running what it meant. Pruitt's credentials were being used tonight, actively, which meant either Pruitt herself was in the hospital at 9:42 p.m., or someone had Pruitt's login and was using it remotely, or she checked Pruitt's last physical badge ping. Sandra Pruitt's badge had not been used to enter or exit any Hartwell General door since 6:17 p.m., 3.5 hours ago, which could mean Pruitt had left her credentials with someone else, or it could mean something else entirely. Lena pulled up the emergency contact file that she wasn't technically supposed to access, but that every charge nurse in the hospital knew how to find because sometimes patients attending physicians went unreachable and you needed a backup number. She found Pruitt's contact record. She noted the home address listed. She noted something else, a field update logged at 7:58 p.m. that had changed Pruitt's emergency contact from her sister to a man named Daniel Pruitt at a Crestwood address. Husband, presumably. New entry, made less than 2 hours ago. She sat back. She thought about this carefully. She thought about a compliance director whose credentials were being used to access a patient record tonight, who had physically left the building hours ago, and who had just had her emergency contact file updated. She thought about Paul Hensley, the federal official who had gone dark at 4:45 this afternoon. She opened a text field on the secure terminal and typed a message directly to Carver's assigned channel. Pruitt credentials active in system at 2142, no physical badge entry since 1817. Emergency contact file updated 1958 by unknown administrator. Recommend welfare check on Pruitt's home address. Cross-reference with Hensley's situation. She sent it and went back to her flagging. She was on the 19th file when Carver appeared in the doorway of the back room. Her face had changed in a way that made Lena stop typing. "We found Hensley," Carver said. Lena waited. "He's alive. He's at a private medical clinic 20 miles north of Crestwood. He was brought in by a private ambulance at 5:30 p.m., registered under a false name. The clinic called it in about 20 minutes ago when they ran his ID to process insurance, and the federal flag on his identity triggered an alert." She paused. "He's stable, but he wasn't there voluntarily." The room was very quiet. "They took him," Lena said. "That's our assessment." She thought about what that meant, the scope of it, the degree of organization required to identify the right federal official, get to him before he could authorize the warrant pathway, and place him in a private clinic under a false identity, all within the same operational window as the calls from the hospital and the judge's recusal. This wasn't a hospital administrator protecting a billing scheme. This was something with tentacles she hadn't fully mapped yet. "The warrant," she said. "Nolan is pushing through the alternate circuit now. Hensley is talking. He's already provided enough to expedite." Carver held her gaze. "We're close. 45 minutes. Maybe less." "In 45 minutes?" Her phone, retrieved from her scrub pocket after Carver had returned it at the warehouse, buzzed. She looked at it. A text from a number she didn't recognize, no name, 6 words. They know you're not at home. She looked at the message for 3 seconds. She showed it to Carver. Carver looked at it, then looked at Lena with an expression that had the particular quality of someone who has just recalibrated the entire situation they thought they understood. "Someone inside is warning you," Carver said. "Or setting me up," Lena said. "Or both." She put the phone face down on the table and thought about the 18 months of documentation sitting on a federal server. She thought about the 23 flagged patient files. She thought about Gerald Okafor's record being accessed at 9:42 by credentials that belonged to a woman who had left the building hours ago. She thought about what Norwal had been doing at that loading dock. Not hurrying, not furtive, managing. She turned back to the terminal and pulled up the live access log for the hospital records system. Real time, every credential currently active in the system, every file currently open. There were 11 active sessions. Most were clinical, night shift nurses, an on-call physician, the pharmacy system running automated reconciliation. One session, logged in under Richard Cade's administrator credentials, had been active for the past 40 minutes. It had opened 47 records. It had not yet deleted anything. It was currently inside the billing archive for the Veterans Wing. Lena's fingers moved to the keyboard. She knew what she was about to do. She also knew that what she was about to do would announce her position in the system immediately, to anyone watching the access logs, which included Cade. She flagged every record in the Veterans Wing billing archive. All of them, every file that existed in that database partition, in a single administrative action that her clinical access technically permitted under the standing audit provision she had used before. It took 11 seconds. The action generated a system-wide notification to the compliance office, to the medical records department, and to the hospital's IT security contact. Cade's session went inactive 4 seconds later. She sat back in the chair and looked at the screen. Her hands were steady, and her heart rate was elevated, and she was acutely, uncomfortably aware that she had just made herself visible to every person inside that building who was watching the system. Carver was reading over her shoulder. She said nothing for a moment. Then her radio fired, a voice, clipped, fast, with the particular timbre of someone transmitting under pressure. "We have a problem at the hospital. Someone just triggered a mass records flag across the Veterans Billing Archive. Cade is on the phone. He's calling someone." A second voice cut in over the first. "Track the call. Now." Then a third voice, one Lena didn't recognize, low and very controlled. "We've got movement at the hospital's main entrance. 3 vehicles. They're not staff. Repeat, 3 vehicles, non-staff, pulling up to Hartwell General's main entrance right now." Carver's hand tightened on her radio. In the 12 seconds of silence that followed, the warehouse went absolutely still. Every person on every terminal, every agent on every radio, holding the moment before something broke wide open. Then the third voice came back. "One of the individuals exiting the lead vehicle is carrying a badge, federal badge. But it's not—" A pause, static, a breath. "It doesn't match any credential in our system. Repeat, unknown federal credentials at Hartwell General main entrance. They're going in." Carver had her radio up before the transmission finished. "Get me a visual on those credentials. Photograph, badge number, anything." The surveillance unit outside Hartwell General came back in 15 seconds. The photograph transmitted to the laptop operator's screen was grainy, low light, taken at distance through a vehicle window. But clear enough. A badge holder, standard federal format, with a seal that looked right from 20 feet away and wrong from 6 inches. "That's a fabrication," the operator said. He had pulled up a comparison on the adjacent screen. "The seal proportion is off. Whoever made it had a good template, but the embossing line on the left edge doesn't match current issue." "So they're not federal," Carver said. "They're dressed federal," the operator said. "And they're inside the building." Lena was already out of the back room. She crossed the warehouse floor and looked at the surveillance feed. 3 vehicles, 2 dark SUVs and a sedan, parked at irregular angles at Hartwell General's main entrance in a way that wasn't quite aggressive but wasn't patient either. 4 individuals had gone inside. 1 had remained at the vehicles. He was standing with his back to the camera, hands in his jacket pockets, which was the posture of someone keeping watch, rather than someone waiting for a friend. "How many people are in that hospital right now?" she asked. The operator checked. "Night staff. 14 clinical. 3 administrative on overnight call. Security desk has 2 on. ED is running with a skeleton crew. 3 nurses, 1 attending. Cade's session went inactive 4 seconds after I flagged the archive, Lena said. He knew immediately, which means he was watching the access log in real time, which means he was already anticipating that someone would move on the records. She looked at Carver. He called someone. Who did he call? We're pulling the trace now. His cell went active at 22:03 for a 47-second call. 2? The operator's face changed slightly. Number is registered to a logistics company in Delaware. Meridian Healthcare Solutions parent entity. Lena stood very still. Meridian, the billing contractor. The company that had been processing $47 million in fraudulent veterans claims through a federal reimbursement pipeline. The company whose silent partner had a federal employment record and had been running interference on the audit for a year. The people in that building right now are not there to help Cade disappear, she said. They're there to make sure nothing leaves that building that could be used against Meridian. Carver looked at her. The same calculation was running behind her eyes. Records can be pulled from the server room directly, Lena continued. Physical drives. You don't need administrator access. You need 10 minutes and someone who knows where the hardware is. Which Norwal knows. Norwal has been in that hospital for 14 months. Carver turned to the operator. Can we shut down the server remotely? Not without Hartwell's IT administrator authorizing the access. Their system isn't connected to any federal override. Get me their IT contact. It's 9:58 p.m. I don't care if it's 4 in the morning. Get them. While that was happening, Lena's phone buzzed again. Same number as before. No name. Server room is B-level East Corridor. They're already heading down. She showed Carver. Carver read it and said quietly and without inflection, someone inside that hospital is feeding us information in real time. Someone who knows the building layout. Someone who is watching those 4 people move through it. Carver looked at her. How many people inside Hartwell would know to contact you specifically? Lena thought about this honestly. More than I'd like, she said. I've worked there for 4 years, but the ones who would know to contact me about a federal operation, she stopped. She thought about the 18 months of documentation. The people who had noticed her noticing things. The colleagues who had asked quiet questions and received careful non-answers. 1, she said. Maybe 2. Can you reach them safely? Not without potentially exposing them. Then we work with what they're giving us. Carver turned to the man with the tactical radio who had been standing at the perimeter of the conversation. How fast can we get a team to Hartwell's main entrance? I can have 4 people there in 8 minutes. On what authority? Without the warrant. He looked at her steadily. Responding to a report of individuals with fraudulent federal credentials entering a civilian medical facility. That's a federal impersonation charge. We don't need a warrant to investigate active fraud in progress. Carver processed this for 2 seconds. Do it. Soft entry, no disruption to the clinical areas, and I want Cade located before anyone else is approached. He stepped away and began making calls. Lena was already thinking about the server room, B-level East Corridor. She knew the building. B-level was the basement, accessed from 2 stairwells, one near the main entrance, one at the far end of the east wing near the loading dock Norwal had used. The server room was behind a keycard door that required IT-level access or administrator credentials. If Cade had given those credentials to the 4 people now moving through Hartwell General, they could be in that room in under 3 minutes from the main entrance. The IT contact came on the line at 22:11. He was groggy and then abruptly not groggy when Carver told him what she needed in 3 sentences. He said he could trigger a remote lockdown of the server room's access control system from his home, which would prevent any credential from opening the door until he manually released it. It would take him 4 minutes to access the administration panel. 4 minutes. The feed from outside Hartwell showed no movement at the vehicles. The man keeping watch had his phone out now, typing something. They're communicating with someone inside, the operator said, watching the same feed. Can you read it? Not in real time. We'd need... Do what you can. Lena stood in the middle of the warehouse floor and felt the particular sensation of a situation moving faster than the mechanisms available to control it. This was not unfamiliar. She had spent years in circumstances where the gap between what needed to happen and what could be authorized to happen was exactly the kind of space where people got hurt. She had learned in those years that the gap didn't close by itself. She looked at Carver. "I can be at Hartwell in 8 minutes. You're not going into that building. I have badge access. I have legitimate clinical standing. You have 4 individuals with fake federal credentials moving toward the hospital's server room and a man outside who is communicating with someone we haven't identified yet." Carver's voice was not unkind, but it was final. "You're not going in alone." "I wouldn't be alone. Your team will be there. My team will be managing the entry situation. You'd be—" Lena's phone buzzed a third time. "Cade is in the administrative corridor, second floor. He has a bag. He is leaving." She showed it to Carver without comment. Carver read it, looked at the surveillance feed, looked at Lena. "If Cade walks out of that building with whatever is in that bag before your team gets there," Lena said, "I know. There is no scenario where that is acceptable." "I know." Carver held her gaze for one long moment. Then she said, "You stay in the clinical areas. You do not approach any of the 4 individuals. If you see Cade, you do not confront him. You call me." Lena was already picking up her badge from the table where it had been placed when she sat down at the terminal. "I'll need a vehicle." The same man who had met them at the door when they arrived, she still didn't know his name, held up a set of keys without being asked. Dark blue Civic parked on the south side. Nothing on it. She took the keys and went. The drive took 9 minutes, not 8, because a signal light on Granger was stuck on red at an intersection with no cross traffic, the particular minor absurdity of infrastructure that didn't know it was in the middle of something. She sat at it for 11 seconds before going through. She parked on the street, not the hospital lot, and walked to the employee entrance on the north side of the building, which was accessed by badge and was not visible from the main entrance where the vehicles were sitting. The badge reader accepted her credentials without hesitation, which meant her access hadn't been flagged or suspended, which was either because Cade hadn't gotten to it yet, or because whoever had generated the flags on her records earlier hadn't thought to revoke physical access. She went in. The night shift baseline of Hartwell General was something she knew in her body. The specific quality of the lighting, the reduced ambient noise, the way the corridors felt larger at this hour with the daytime population stripped out. She went to the stairwell rather than the elevator and came out on the second floor, administrative corridor, which was exactly what the text had said. The corridor was empty. She stood in the stairwell doorway for 3 seconds, checking the length of the hall. Administration offices ran along the left side. Cade's office was the third door. The light under his door was on. She called Carver. "I'm on the second floor administrative corridor," she said quietly. "Light is on under Cade's office. No visual on him yet." "Team is 90 seconds from the main entrance," Carver said. "Do not move toward his office." "Understood." She stayed in the doorway. 30 seconds passed. The door to Cade's office opened. Richard Cade was 61 years old and looked right now like a man who had made a series of decisions over a long period of time and had just arrived at the moment where all of them came due simultaneously. He was wearing his suit jacket, which he rarely did this late in the day, and he was carrying a laptop bag over one shoulder and a physical file folder under his other arm, holding it with the slightly too careful grip of someone making sure it didn't open. He came out of his office, turned to lock the door behind him, and then turned back toward the corridor and saw her. The moment lasted perhaps 2 seconds, long enough for his face to go through 3 things in rapid succession: recognition, calculation, and then a settling into an expression she would not have predicted, which was a version of composure. "Ms. Vasquez," he said, "you're not scheduled tonight." "Neither are you," she said. He looked at her for a moment. He looked at the badge on her chest. He looked at the corridor behind her, then the one behind him. "I was doing some administrative catch-up," he said. "Late night. You know how it is?" "I do," she said. "Long days." Something moved behind his eyes. A recalibration. He had run a hospital for 3 years, which meant he had run 1,000 conversations where the subtext was doing more work than the surface. And he was, she recognized, very good at it. "Is there something I can help you with?" he asked. His voice was calm, professionally, expensively calm. I flagged some records earlier, she said. Patient files in the veterans wing. I wanted to make sure the system registered it correctly. At 10 o'clock at night. Patient care doesn't follow office hours. He smiled. It was a precise smile, not reaching anything behind it. No, it doesn't. He shifted the laptop bag slightly on his shoulder. I'll let you get to it then. Good night, Ms. Vasquez. He started walking toward the far stairwell, away from the main entrance, away from where Carver's team would be coming in. She had told Carver she wouldn't confront him. She hadn't said she wouldn't follow him. She stepped into the corridor and walked behind him at a distance, phone in her hand, and typed a text to Carver's number one-handed. Cade, heading to south stairwell, second floor, laptop bag plus physical file. She got 12 steps before the elevator at the end of the corridor opened and 2 of Carver's team came out. Not in tactical gear, in civilian clothes, the kind of deliberately unremarkable look that federal agents adopted when they needed to move through a civilian space without triggering alarm. One of them was a woman Lena didn't recognize. The other was the man with the tactical radio from the warehouse. Cade stopped. The woman held up credentials. Mr. Cade, federal investigation. We need you to come with us. Cade looked at the credentials for a long moment. Then he looked back at Lena, still standing in the middle of the corridor behind him. And in his expression, in the specific quality of the look he gave her, she read something she had seen before in other circumstances. The moment when a person understands that the trap they thought they were navigating is one they walked into sometime much earlier, and that the walls closed long before they felt it. He didn't run. She had half expected him to. Instead, he set the laptop bag down on the floor carefully, like he was setting down something fragile, and he straightened and he said, to no one in particular, I want my attorney. That's your right, the woman said. The bag stays here. He looked at the bag, looked at the file folder still under his arm. That too, the woman said. He handed it over. Lena watched them walk him to the elevator. The man with the tactical radio caught her eye briefly as he passed and gave her one short nod. Not congratulatory, not dramatic, just an acknowledgement that she had done what she said she would do. She nodded back. She stood in the empty corridor for a moment after the elevator closed. The administrative offices were quiet. Cade's office door was locked. The light was still on inside, showing under the door in a thin line. Her phone rang. Carver. Cade is in custody, Lena said. I know. The team on B level got there before the 4 individuals reached the server room. The IT lockdown held. They couldn't get in. All 4 are being detained right now under the federal impersonation charge. A brief pause. The warrant came through at 22:27. Emergency authorization, signed by 2 senior federal circuit judges through the alternate pathway. Lena leaned against the wall. The warrant. It felt right now like something that had taken longer than it should have, which she knew was not fair and also was completely accurate. What do we have? She asked. Enough. The file folder Cade was carrying has physical copies of internal communications between him, Norwal, Pruitt, and the Meridian executive team going back 26 months. We believe he was taking them off-site for destruction. Another pause. And the documents at the storage facility are now formally under federal seal. The fire marshal's inspection gave us the window we needed, and the warrant covers the rest. Lena let out a breath. Norwal? Still in the building. He came back from the loading dock about 40 minutes ago and went to his office. We're picking him up now. Carver's voice shifted slightly. Pruitt has been located. She's at home, she's safe, she wasn't there voluntarily. It looks like her credentials were stolen, not handed over. Someone accessed her office this afternoon while she was in a meeting and lifted her keycard and login details. Lena thought about the welfare check she had flagged. Is she all right? Shaken. She'll need to give a statement, but she's cooperating and she wasn't harmed. A pause. She knew something was wrong with the billing system, Vasquez. She'd been documenting it herself for 8 months, differently than you. She didn't know about the federal investigation, but she had records. Another layer. Another person who had been quietly watching and documenting while the institution above them worked to keep the machinery running. Lena felt something complicated about this that she didn't have words for right now. The anonymous text messages, she said. The ones warning me. Pruitt's personal cell, used by her, from home. Carver let that sit for a moment. She figured out what was happening tonight when she realized her keycard had been used to access Okafor's record. She couldn't call the hospital. She couldn't call the police. She didn't know who to trust. She knew your name from your compliance reports. Lena stood in the corridor and thought about Sandra Pruitt sitting at home, watching her stolen credentials being used in real time, and deciding the only person she could think to warn was a nurse she had never directly spoken to. She made the right call, Lena said. She did. The corridor was very quiet. Somewhere below the night shift was running, patients being monitored, medications being administered, the ordinary machinery of a hospital moving through its overnight cycle. In the basement, federal agents were securing a server room. On the first floor, 4 individuals with fraudulent credentials were being processed. Upstairs, a man who had run this institution for 3 years was sitting in a vehicle waiting for his attorney. "I need to check on my flagged records," Lena said. "Make sure the system logged everything correctly before I leave." "You have 20 minutes, Carver said. "Then I need you back here." She went to the nurses' station on the second floor. The administrative section had a terminal and logged in. The audit flags were intact. Every one of the 23 patient files she had flagged showed clean access logs, time-stamped, preserved. The billing archive flags had generated exactly the secondary logs she had described. Every access Cade had made in the 40 minutes before his session went inactive was recorded in a file that now sat in a federal evidentiary chain. She went through it methodically. 41 records Cade had opened. He hadn't deleted anything in the time she'd been watching, which she now understood. He hadn't been in there to delete. He had been in there to take screenshots, to compile a personal copy of the records that would tell him exactly what federal investigators had access to and what they didn't. It was the kind of move a man made when he was deciding whether to run or to stay and manage the damage. He had been deciding, and she had interrupted the decision before it was made. She logged out and sat for a moment at the empty nurses' station. The corridors were quiet. Through the window at the end of the hall, she could see the parking area, lit orange by the facility lights, and 2 additional federal vehicles that had arrived in the past 20 minutes. Her phone buzzed. Not Carver this time. An internal hospital number. She looked at it. The charge nurse desk on the night shift. She answered. "Vasquez, it's Monique. What is happening in this building right now?" The night charge nurse's voice was controlled but tight with the particular strain of someone trying to keep a unit running while the building around them was clearly in the middle of something she hadn't been told about. "Federal investigation," Lena said. "Active right now. Clinical areas are not involved. Your staff is safe. Your patients are safe. Don't let anyone into the records room without confirming their credentials with the federal agents in the lobby." A short silence. Were you here? Tonight? I'm here now. Is this about... Monique stopped. She was a careful woman, and she was choosing her words. "The billing stuff. The veterans wing." Lena thought about what to say. "Don't discuss anything with anyone except federal investigators tonight. Document everything. Keep your unit running." Another silence, shorter. "Okay," Monique said. "Okay, you're coming back in, right? For your regular shift?" "I'll be there at 7, Lena said. "Keep things running until then." She hung up and sat with her hands on the desk for a moment. 7 a.m. was 8 hours away. She had been awake for 17 hours. She had been in handcuffs tonight. She had assessed a federal official in a field setting. She had driven across the city to a building she wasn't supposed to be in, and she had flagged 47 files while 4 people with fake badges tried to remove the physical hardware that stored them. She should feel something more dramatic about all of this, she thought. The fact that she mostly felt tired said something about either her constitution or her particular history, and she wasn't sure which. She stood, clipped her badge back to her pocket, and walked to the elevator. The federal processing of the 4 individuals with fraudulent credentials was happening in a sectioned-off area of the lobby when she came down. She walked past it without stopping. The man keeping watch outside had been detained at some point. His post was empty, the vehicles still sitting at their irregular angles at the entrance. She found Carver's team lead, the woman who had met Cade in the corridor, near the main entrance speaking with the hospital's overnight security supervisor. "I'm heading back to the warehouse," Lena said. "Agent Carver wants you to stop at the storage facility first," the woman said. They've got the physical documents under federal seal, but there's a question about the medical record boxes, specifically whether they fall under HIPAA provisions that require a clinical professional present for review. You're the only one with both the clinical standing and the clearance. Lena looked at her. I know, the woman said. Long night. What's the address? Granger Avenue Self-Storage, Unit 44 through 47. Federal team is already on site. She went. The storage facility was lit up with portable work lights when she arrived, the fire marshal's vehicles still present alongside 3 federal cars and a van that had arrived with the warrant. The federal team lead on site was a man named Burroughs who shook her hand with the efficiency of someone who had been told who she was and had decided that was sufficient introduction. We've got 6 boxes that are clearly billing records, he said, walking her through. Another 4 that appear to be internal communications. Then there are 3 boxes tagged with patient identifiers that we haven't opened because of the clinical question. The storage unit smelled like dust and the particular chemical undertone of plastic file boxes stored in a confined space. The boxes were stacked neatly, which told her they hadn't been thrown in hurriedly. They had been organized, labeled, arranged by someone who expected to need to access them again. She opened the first of the 3 flagged boxes and looked at the contents. Medical records, patient files, physical copies, with names and dates and treatment codes. She went through the top folder carefully. Gerald Okafor, the man whose record had been accessed 14 times in 6 weeks by Pruitt's stolen credentials. His physical file was here, in a storage unit 3 blocks from the hospital, which meant someone had pulled his original records and replaced them, or intended to replace them, with whatever the digital version currently showed. These are originals, she said. The digital records have been modified. These are the unmodified versions. Burroughs absorbed this. How significant is that? For a patient who is deceased and whose file has been used to generate fraudulent treatment claims? She looked at him. His original record is the proof of what actually happened to him versus what was billed. Without this, you have a number in a billing system. With this, you have evidence of exactly what was fabricated and exactly how much money was stolen in his name. She said it simply and without heat, but she was aware, standing in a storage unit at 11:43 p.m. looking at the physical record of a veteran who had died and then been billed posthumously for medical treatment he had never received, of something that had been sitting behind the clinical detachment for the past 18 months. Not rage exactly. A quieter, more durable thing. All 3 boxes, she said. Same situation. Clinical records, originals, pulled from the hospital before they could be modified to match the fraudulent billing codes. She turned from the box. These need to be in federal evidence storage tonight, every one of them. Already planned for, Burroughs said. We just needed the clinical assessment to document the basis for inclusion. She spent another 40 minutes at the facility, going through the patient-flagged boxes with Burroughs and a federal evidence processor, documenting each file's contents and the basis for its inclusion in the federal record. It was tedious and necessary, and she did it with the same methodical attention she brought to everything that mattered, which was most things. It was after midnight when she finally got back in the blue Civic and sat in the parking lot of the storage facility for a moment without starting the engine. She thought about Cade's face in the corridor, the precision of the composure he had assembled when he saw her. She thought about Norwal at the loading dock, unhurried, directing. She thought about Dale Rourke earlier that evening, earlier, though it felt like a separate era, putting handcuffs on her in front of the ambulance bay while a man in a wheelchair filmed it. She thought about the 18 months before all of this. The report she had filed into a compliance office that was itself part of the machinery she was reporting. The follow-up calls that went unanswered. The meeting where she had been told, in the language of institutional HR, that her documentation practices needed to be reviewed, which was the language institutions used when they wanted someone to understand that continuing to document things would have professional consequences. She had kept documenting. She had just done it differently after that. She started the car. The drive back to the warehouse took 11 minutes. She parked, went inside, and found the operations floor quieter than she'd left it. Several of the laptop stations had been stood down, some of the personnel had shifted to phone briefings, and the whiteboard had been updated with so many new additions that the original network map was almost unrecognizable beneath the layers. Holt was on his feet, which was either good news medically or an indication that he had decided the situation overrode her 2-hour monitoring window. Possibly both. He was standing at the whiteboard with Carver, and when Lena came in, he turned and looked at her with an expression that was about several things at once. "Storage facility is documented," she said. "Original patient records are in federal custody. Burroughs has the full clinical assessment." "Good," Holt said. "Come look at this." She crossed to the whiteboard. The network map had expanded from the nodes she'd seen earlier. Cade, Norwal, Pruitt, Meridian Healthcare Solutions, the Federal Insider, and now had 7 additional names connected by new lines in a color she hadn't seen before. Red. The red lines ran from Meridian to 4 of the new names, and from those 4 names to a node at the top of the board she hadn't been able to see from across the room. She looked at the top node now. The photograph pinned there was a man in his early 60s, professionally dressed, the kind of image taken for an official biography page. The name under it was one she recognized from the federal oversight structure Holt had described during her assessment of him. Not a name she had known before tonight, but one that had context now. "That's the silent partner," she said. "The one with the federal employment record." "Garrison Webb," Holt said, "Deputy Director of the Federal Healthcare Reimbursement Oversight Division. He has been in that position for 6 years." He paused. "He has been directing the audit interference for the entirety of that time." She looked at the photograph. Webb looked back from it with the particular blankness of official photography, nothing in the expression that could be read as anything. "Where is he now?" she asked. "That," Carver said, "is the problem." Lena looked at her. Webb was in Washington this morning for a scheduled oversight committee hearing. His office confirmed his attendance at 10 a.m. At 2 p.m., his chief of staff reported that he left for a personal appointment and hadn't returned. He missed a 3 p.m. call. He missed a 4 p.m. call. Carver's voice was precise and unhurried. "He has not been reachable since 2:15 p.m. today, before Hensley went dark, before the calls from the hospital, before the judge recused, before any of tonight's operational movement." "He knew before any of them did," Lena said. "He was the one who told them," Holt said. "Webb has had access to this investigation at the oversight level since it was opened. Every time we got close to an authorization, something disrupted it. Delacroix's recusal tonight was not an accident. Webb had a relationship with Delacroix that goes back 12 years. He made one call, and she stepped back. His jaw was set. We should have identified him faster. That's on us." "Where would he go?" Lena asked. "With everything moving the way it has tonight, we have 3 possible locations under surveillance," Carver said. "A private residence in Virginia, a property registered under his wife's maiden name in Maryland, and a private airfield in Pennsylvania where he has a long-term hangar lease." She paused. "The airfield is the one we're most concerned about. If he has a plane, he has a Citation X," Carver said. "Range of over 3,000 miles." The warehouse was quiet for a moment. Outside somewhere, the night was producing the ordinary sounds of a city moving through its small hours. Traffic, distant sirens, the ambient hum of a place that never fully stopped. Lena looked at the network map. All of it. The hospital, the billing contractor, the compliance machinery, the federal interference layer, ran upward to that one photograph at the top of the board. "He built this from the oversight position," she said. "He was the person who was supposed to catch exactly this kind of scheme. He used that position to build one instead. And to make sure no one else could catch it," Holt said. She stood looking at the board. She thought about the $47 million. She thought about the veterans whose names had been used, some of them dead, their records pulled and altered and billed through a system that Webb himself had been responsible for monitoring. "The airfield surveillance," she said. "When did you put it up?" Carver checked. 22:50. Lena looked at the clock on the wall. "That's over an hour ago. Has there been any movement?" "Negative as of the last check-in at 23:30. "When is the next check-in?" 12 minutes. Lena stood and waited. The warehouse did the same, or felt like it did. The residual operational activity continuing in the background while the center of it held still. The 12 minutes passed. Carver's radio activated at 0011. "Airfield surveillance, report." The response that came back was not the clean negative of the previous check-in. It was a voice under pressure, tight with the specific quality of someone reporting something they could not fully explain. "We have a problem at the airfield. Hangar is open. Aircraft is not present." A breath. "We have one individual in custody at the perimeter. Civilian groundskeeper. Says he was told to open the hangar at 11 p.m. by a call from Webb's office. That's all he knows." Another breath. "We're pulling the tower records now, but early read is the aircraft departed approximately 90 minutes ago on a flight plan filed under a charter company name we haven't verified yet." Carver looked at Holt. Holt looked at the board. Lena looked at the photograph of Garrison Webb, looking back at nothing from his official biography. 90 minutes ago. While she had been at the storage facility, while the warehouse had been managing the Hartwell arrests, the warrant execution, the processing of 4 individuals in a hospital lobby. While all of it was moving, Webb had already been gone. Carver's second radio channel, the one Lena had not heard activated all evening, came alive with a voice she didn't recognize, direct, clipped, carrying the particular authority of someone much higher than field level. "This is Deputy Administrator Crane. I need Agent Carver, and I need Vasquez. We have a developing situation, and it requires both of you on a secure channel in the next 3 minutes." Carver looked at Lena. Lena looked at the photograph. "Vasquez," the voice said again, "we know where Webb is going, and we need you to understand something about why." The secure channel opened with the background noise of an operations center running at full capacity. Keyboards, low voices, the specific ambient tension of people managing something that hadn't resolved yet. Deputy Administrator Crane came on without preamble. Webb filed the flight plan under a charter company called Northgate Aviation Services. The company doesn't exist. The tail number on the aircraft belongs to a plane that was decommissioned in 2019. A brief pause. What does exist is a private landing strip outside a town called Mineral Fork in rural West Virginia, registered to a landholding company that traces back through 4 shell entities to a man named Douglas Fitch. Fitch is Webb's brother-in-law. Carver was writing. "How long is the flight?" Citation X at cruise speed, roughly 75 minutes from the Pennsylvania airfield. He departed at approximately 22:30. That puts him on the ground in Mineral Fork at approximately 23:45. Lena looked at the clock. 00:19. "He's already there," she said. "Yes," Crane said, "which is why the next piece matters. West Virginia State Police were notified 11 minutes ago, and a federal marshal team out of Charleston is 40 minutes from Mineral Fork. They will reach the property." A deliberate pause. "What I need Vasquez to understand is why Webb was going there, because it changes what happens next." Lena waited. "Garrison Webb has a medical condition," Crane said. "Atrial fibrillation diagnosed 8 months ago. He is on anticoagulation therapy and a rate control regimen. His personal physician is not in West Virginia. The individual at the Mineral Fork property, Fitch, has no medical background." Another pause. "Webb has been under extreme stress for the past 12 hours. He missed his evening medication. We know this because his pharmacy's automatic refill system flagged an overdue pickup at 1900 hours, and the flag was in a data poll we ran on his personal records 20 minutes ago." Lena understood before he finished the sentence. "He's a flight risk who is also a medical risk. The Marshall team is law enforcement, not medical. If Webb is in cardiac distress when they arrive, you need someone who can manage it. I need someone who can assess it, manage it if necessary, and make sure the arrest doesn't become a medical emergency that complicates the federal processing." Crane's voice was direct. "I know what you've already done tonight, Vasquez. I'm asking anyway." She looked at the clock again. 40 minutes for the Marshall team. She was in Crestwood. The drive to a private airfield in the right direction, plus a federal transport flight in a fast aircraft. "How quickly can you get me airborne?" she asked Carver. 20 minutes to the airfield, 10 minutes to prep. We have a King Air on standby." Carver paused. "Flight time to Mineral Fork is approximately 45 minutes. That puts me there around the same time as the Marshals. Give or take." She thought about this for 3 seconds. She was running on no food and 18 hours of continuous wakefulness, and her hip was bruised purple under her scrubs. She was also, she recognized, not going to say no. "Get the King Air ready," she said. She used the 20 minutes to the airfield to eat. Someone produced a sandwich from somewhere in the warehouse, the kind of thing that had been sitting in a refrigerator long enough to be uninspiring, and she ate it in the car with the particular gracelessness of someone who had stopped caring about the experience of eating and needed only the function of it. She drank a bottle of water. She went through the medical kit Carver's team had restocked and confirmed what she had and what she might need for an anticoagulated patient in AFib under stress. The King Air was a turboprop, faster than it looked, and the two federal agents already aboard when she arrived said nothing to her when she got on, which she appreciated. The flight to Mineral Fork was 43 minutes. She spent most of it with her eyes closed, not sleeping but doing the specific kind of rest that her military background had taught her was possible in the gaps between what a situation required. Not recovery, just a temporary step back from full expenditure. She thought about the moment in Cade's corridor, the way he had set the laptop bag down carefully, the composure he had assembled and worn like something fitted right up until the moment it was no longer useful and he had let it go. She had seen that particular surrender before, not often, but enough to recognize it. The moment when someone who has been managing a constructed reality for years meets a reality they can't manage, and something in them simply stops trying. She thought about the 18 months. She thought about Gerald Okafor's physical file in a storage unit. She was not a person who needed the world to tell her she was right. She had spent most of her adult life in circumstances that didn't offer that kind of validation, and she had learned to work without it. But there was something she allowed herself to acknowledge in the air above West Virginia at 1 a.m, and knowing that the paper she had generated quietly and patiently in a compliance system designed to bury it had survived, that it was now federal evidence, that it had mattered. The landing strip at Mineral Fork was rough and short, and the pilot put the King Air down on it with the focused competence of someone who had landed on worse. The Federal Marshal Team's vehicles were already at the property when they arrived. 2 SUVs parked on a gravel drive outside a farmhouse that had the dark, settled look of a building that had been here a long time and expected to outlast everything around it. The lead marshal, a woman named Delaney, met Lena at the edge of the drive. "He's inside," Delaney said. Fitch answered the door, didn't resist. "Webb is in the main room. She paused in a way that medical people recognized immediately. "He's not well." Lena went inside. The farmhouse interior was what she expected. Plain, functional, the habitation of someone who used a space rather than curated it. Garrison Webb was sitting in a chair near the fireplace, which wasn't running, and he was the color of old concrete. His breathing was slightly labored, not dramatically so, but enough. His hands, resting on his thighs, had a faint tremor. He looked at her when she came in. His eyes were fully alert, which was something, but what was in them was not the blankness of the official biography photograph. It was the look of a man who had run a very long way and had arrived somewhere that was not what he had hoped. She crossed the room, crouched in front of him, took his wrist. His pulse was fast and irregular, the irregularity of atrial fibrillation rather than the more dangerous arrhythmias, but fast enough to be concerning given the stress load and the missed medication. "When did you last take your metoprolol?" she asked. "This morning," he said. His voice was thin but controlled. "And the anticoagulant?" "Yesterday evening." She looked at her kit. She looked at him. "I'm going to give you something to bring your rate down. It's going to make you feel better, and I need you to let it work before you talk to anyone. That means no statements, no phone calls, nothing until your rate is under 100 and you've had water and you've sat still for 20 minutes. He looked at her. "Who are you?" "I'm the nurse from Hartwell General," she said, "the one you've been helping steal from." Something moved across his face. She didn't try to read it. She was opening her kit. "I didn't—" He stopped. 20 minutes, she said. "Then you can say whatever you want to say." She administered the medication, got water into him, and sat back on her heels and watched his heart rate on the portable monitor she had set up. And in the 20 minutes that followed, while the federal marshals waited with the patience of people who were practiced at waiting, Garrison Webb's rate came down from 142 to 89, and the tremor in his hands subsided and the concrete color in his face resolved into something merely pale. He looked at the monitor. He looked at her. "The investigation," he said. "How much do you have?" "Enough," she said. He absorbed this. He looked at the fireplace, cold and dark. "I didn't build it for what it became," he said. It wasn't an excuse exactly. It had the sound of something he had been saying to himself for a while and had stopped believing. "That's between you and whoever prosecutes you," Lena said. She stood up. "Marshal Delaney is outside. You're medically stable enough to be transported. I'd recommend a hospital evaluation in Charleston before anything else, and I'll document that recommendation for the record." She closed her kit. "Vasquez," Webb said. She turned. "The reports you filed," he said, "through the hospital compliance system. I saw copies of them. 14 months ago, someone flagged them to me at the oversight level as a potential audit disruption." He paused. "I was the one who buried them." She looked at him for a moment. She thought about the 14 months. The follow-up calls that went unanswered. The meeting about her documentation practices. The specific exhaustion of generating evidence into a system that was eating it. "I know," she said. She walked outside and left him with Delaney. The drive back to Crestwood took 2 hours in a federal vehicle with one of Carver's agents at the wheel and Lena in the passenger seat, with her eyes directed at the dark road and her mind moving through the shape of everything that had happened since 5:45 yesterday morning. 18-plus hours of continuous operation, 2 clinical assessments in non-clinical settings, 1 arrest, 600 miles traveled, 47 patient files flagged, and a man in a West Virginia farmhouse whose heart rate she had brought down from 142 to 89. She got back to Crestwood at 3:27 a.m. The federal warehouse was still active, but at a lower register, the overnight pace of an operation that had moved past its acute phase into documentation and processing. Holt was there. She had half expected him to have been transported to a hospital, but he was at a desk with a cup of coffee and a stack of printed documents, and the alert expression of someone who had found a second wind and was using it efficiently. He looked up when she came in. "Webb is in federal custody," she said. "I know. Delaney called it in an hour ago." He set down the document he was holding. "How was he?" "Stable. He needs a cardiology consult in the next 24 hours. She sat down in the nearest chair, not because she chose it, but because her legs made the decision. "He's going to cooperate." "Yes," Holt said. "He is." He looked at her for a moment. "You should sleep." "I have a shift at 7. "Vasquez." "I have 19 patients on that ward," she said. "They didn't do anything wrong, and they deserve competent care." He looked at her with an expression that mixed exasperation and something else she couldn't quite name. "You will get a few hours of sleep first. I'll make sure there's someone to cover the first part of your shift if you need the time. That's not negotiable." She was too tired to argue with something reasonable. "Fine." She slept on a cot in the warehouse back room for 4 hours. It was not comfortable, and it was also the deepest 4 hours of sleep she had had in recent memory, the kind that only happened when a body had been pushed far enough past its reserve that it stopped pretending it had a choice. She woke at 7:38. She was 38 minutes late for her shift. She went anyway. The hospital was different when she walked in. Not visibly. The clinical machinery was running, the day shift was moving through its routines, the patients were being seen. But there was something in the air that Lena had learned to read over years of working in institutions. A specific texture of altered awareness, the way a place felt when the people inside it knew something had shifted, even if they didn't yet know exactly what. Monique was at the charge desk when Lena came in, and she looked at her for a long moment without speaking. "You want to tell me what happened last night?" Monique said. "Not yet," Lena said. "Tell me about my patients." The next 4 hours were ordinary in the way that all clinical work was ordinary. Methodical, physical, small decisions made continuously, the specific demands of 19 individual people who needed things that had nothing to do with federal investigations or storage facilities or flight plans filed under non-existent charter companies. She changed a dressing on a post-op wound that was healing correctly. She caught a medication discrepancy in a chart before it became a problem. She sat with an 81-year-old veteran named Harold Trent for 12 minutes because he was scared about a procedure scheduled for the afternoon and he didn't have family coming in until evening, and 12 minutes was what she had, so she gave it. She was not graceful about all of it. She was short with a supply tech who brought the wrong size catheter. She wrote a note in a chart with handwriting that was worse than usual because her hand was tired. She forgot, twice, to follow up on a non-urgent call from a family member and had to apologize for the delay. She was not a perfect nurse. She was a present one, and that morning it was enough. At 11:45, Carver came to the ward. She came in civilian clothes, and she waited at the entrance until Lena saw her and came over. They stood near the window at the end of the corridor with the noise of the unit running behind them. "Charges," Carver said, without preface, because Lena didn't need one. "Richard Cade, federal fraud, conspiracy, obstruction of a federal investigation, abuse of administrative authority. Sandra Pruitt is not being charged. She's cooperating as a witness, and the evidence confirms her credentials were stolen. Frederick Norwall, federal fraud, conspiracy, accessory to obstruction. 4 counts of fraudulent billing on individual veteran accounts as a named co-conspirator with Meridian Healthcare Solutions." She paused. "Dale Rourke, unlawful detention, civil rights violation under color of law, obstruction of a federal investigation. The footage from the ambulance bay, including the man in the wheelchair's phone video, has been formally entered into the record. The Office of Professional Responsibility has opened a separate administrative proceeding." Lena had known most of this was coming. Hearing it stated in sequence was different from knowing it was coming. It had a weight to it that she sat with for a moment. "Meridian Healthcare Solutions," she said. "Federal seizure order executed at 6 a.m. The company's assets are frozen. The 3 executives named in the billing scheme, including the individual Webb brought in as the silent partner in the reimbursement pipeline, were arrested this morning. Total fraudulent claims being audited now, but early estimate from the forensic accounting team is between $47 and $62 million. Carver paused. Most of it came from veterans' healthcare reimbursements. Some of the accounts used were patients who had died. The oldest fraudulent claim dates back 4.5 years. 4.5 years. Webb had been in his oversight position for 6. The scheme had been running for most of his tenure. He hadn't built it, he had said. Lena thought about that and decided it was probably partly true and almost entirely irrelevant. "Webb?" she asked. "Cooperation agreement and negotiation. He'll face federal charges regardless. The cooperation affects the scope and sentencing, not the fact of prosecution. Conspiracy, fraud, obstruction, abuse of federal office." Carver met her gaze steadily. "He is not walking away from this." Lena nodded once. "The affected veterans," she said, "the ones whose accounts were used, whose records were altered. The forensic team is working through every account. The original physical records you pulled from the storage facility are the baseline. They'll be used to establish what each patient's actual treatment history was versus what was billed. Where there are discrepancies in benefits or coverage that resulted from the falsified records, those will be corrected." Carver paused. "It's going to take months, but it will happen." Gerald Okafor's file. Harold Trent in room 7, afraid about his afternoon procedure. The 23 patients she had flagged last night and the hundreds of others she hadn't personally touched, whose names had been run through a billing system like an accounting exercise. "Good," she said. It wasn't enough of a word for what she meant, but it was accurate. Carver reached into her jacket and produced an envelope. "This is formal documentation of your clearance in the federal record, your role in the investigation, the nature of your work over the past 14 months, and the federal assessment of your conduct throughout. It's for your personnel file here, and for any proceeding that comes from Rourke's actions last night." She paused. "Holt also asked me to give you this verbally, because he said he wanted you to hear it stated rather than just read it. Your documentation was the foundation of this case. Everything else we built on what you generated inside this hospital over 18 months. Without it, we had a billing anomaly. With it, we had a case." Lena held the envelope and looked out the window at the end of the corridor. The Crestwood skyline was modest and gray under a November overcast, the kind of day that didn't offer much in the way of visual drama. She had lived in this city for 4 years. She had worked in this building for 4 years. She had walked these corridors and filed these reports, and attended these meetings and stood in this specific quality of institutional fluorescent light for 4 years. And for most of that time, she had been doing something she could not tell anyone about and waiting for a process she could not control to reach a conclusion she was not guaranteed. She thought about the morning she had first noticed the billing discrepancy in the veterans wing. She had been doing chart review on a patient who had already been discharged, following up on a treatment authorization question, and the billing code didn't match the treatment record. And she had thought, that's probably an error. She had flagged it as probably an error. She had gone home. She had come back the next morning and pulled 3 more charts, because she was the kind of person who, once she saw something, couldn't stop looking until she understood what she was seeing. That was not heroism. That was a particular kind of constitutional stubbornness that had caused her problems in every context she had ever operated in. She was aware of this about herself. Deputy Director Holt, she said, his medical follow-up. Has he had a proper evaluation? Carver almost smiled. He was seen by a cardiologist at 6 this morning. Nothing structural. Hypertensive episode, stress and dehydration, compounded by low blood sugar. He's been told to eat regular meals, which I understand he received as news. He should be on a better monitoring regimen for his blood pressure. I'll tell him you said so. Tell him I'll put it in writing if he'd prefer. This time Carver did smile, briefly. I'll tell him that too. She left. Lena put the envelope in her locker and went back to her patients. At 2 in the afternoon, a notification went out from the Crestwood Police Department's Office of Professional Responsibility that Officer Dale Rourke had been placed on administrative suspension pending formal investigation. It was the kind of notification that the department issued in dry institutional language that told you nothing about the texture of what had happened, and it went out on a public-facing page that most people never checked. The man in the wheelchair, his name was Victor Solanas, a 47-year-old outpatient rehabilitation patient who had been sitting outside Hartwell General for the 3rd time that week because the afternoon light was better there than in his room, and he liked the air, had already posted his phone footage the previous evening. By 2 in the afternoon, it had been viewed over 400,000 times. By the following morning, it would cross 2 million. Lena didn't watch it. She heard about it from Monique, who described it in the particular tones of someone who was processing something that made her both angry and proud simultaneously. Lena listened and said she was glad it was out there and went back to her chart. The hospital's board of directors convened an emergency session that afternoon and issued a statement confirming their full cooperation with the federal investigation. The statement did not mention Cade by name. The board's legal counsel, Lena suspected, had advised against it. It was the kind of careful, self-protective institutional language that organizations produced when they were trying to distinguish themselves from the people they had employed and overseen, and it satisfied exactly no one. 2 days later, a different kind of communication came. Not a statement. A letter on federal letterhead addressed to Lena Vasquez, RN, and hand-delivered by a federal courier to the hospital's administrative front desk. It was from Deputy Director Marcus Holt. It ran 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph was formal, the federal record, the documentation, the official commendation. The second paragraph was less formal and said, among other things, that in 22 years of federal investigative work, he had encountered people who documented things they were not supposed to see and filed reports that disappeared and kept going anyway, and that the number of such people was smaller than anyone would like to believe. The third paragraph contained a question rather than a statement. It asked whether she had considered at any point whether her skills and her particular way of moving through situations might be applied in a broader context than a single hospital ward. It mentioned that a new division focused specifically on healthcare fraud affecting military and veteran populations was in the process of being established. It mentioned that the division would need people who understood clinical environments from the inside. It said the question was open and there was no urgency, and she should think about it for as long as she needed. She read it twice. She folded it and put it in her locker beside the envelope from Carver. She thought about it for 4 days. On the 4th day, she came in for her morning shift and found Harold Trent already awake when she did her first check, which was unusual for him. He was sitting up in bed with the lamp on, reading something on a tablet his daughter had brought. He looked better than he had the week before. The procedure had gone well, and he was moving toward discharge in the next day or two. "You look terrible," he said when she came in. He said it in the affectionate, blunt way of someone who had been around long enough to have stopped performing social lubrication. "Thank you, Harold. You been sleeping?" "Somewhat." "Somewhat," he repeated with the skepticism of a man who had served 23 years in the military and was familiar with the way people in operational roles describe their rest. "You should sleep." "I'll sleep when things slow down." He looked at her over his reading glasses. "They don't slow down," he said. "You just get better at resting in the gaps." She stood at his bedside and thought about that. She thought about the 4 hours on the cot in the warehouse. She thought about the King Air flight to West Virginia with her eyes closed. She thought about the specific skill of being present in the gaps rather than burning through them. "You're going to be discharged in 2 days," she said. "How are you feeling about going home?" "Good," he said. "Scared. Both." He set down the tablet. "My wife's been gone 4 years. The house is—" He paused. "It's fine. I manage." "Is there someone who can check in on you the first week?" "My daughter's coming. She's got 3 kids and a job, so she can't stay long, but she'll come." He looked at Lena with the directness of someone who has earned the right to look at people directly. "You going to be here next time I come in?" She thought about Holt's letter. She thought about the 18 months and the 4 years and the 8 years before Crestwood. She thought about the $62 million and the veterans whose files were being corrected one by a forensic accounting team that would take months to finish the work. "I'll be here for a while yet," she said. It was true. It was also not the complete answer, but Harold Trent nodded like it was the one he needed, and she adjusted his chart and moved on to the next room. Frederick Norwell surrendered his medical license 16 days after his arrest, before the licensing board's formal proceedings were completed. Richard Cade was denied bail at his federal hearing on the grounds of flight risk and remained in custody pending trial. Garrison Webb entered a cooperation agreement and was transferred to federal protective custody, which was its own kind of prison. The 4 individuals with fraudulent credentials who had entered Hartwell General pleaded to federal impersonation charges within the month. Dale Rourke was formally terminated by the Crestwood Police Department 3 weeks after the footage crossed 2 million